to the Festival
of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, I'm Jenny Ferns, and I live in Florida, but I have an English accent. And I decided that I would write a memoir about my life when I retired. I thought I would have time. And as I started my memoir, I realized that there are a few skeletons in the closet of my family. And if I started rattling them, it would probably not be a very good idea. So what I did, I decided to write a novel loosely based on my family history. And the first part is called Ripple Effect Because of the War. The effect of war on a family. So in a fictional family, loosely based on my family. So it starts before the Second World War in England, during the Second World War, and how it affected the women who were left behind as the men went to war, and how it affected the children who were left behind. And then after the war, when the soldiers came home, in this case, the hero of the one of the heroes in this book was a pilot in the RAF fighting in the Second World War. When he came home, he had PTSD. Of course, nobody really knew what PTSD was then. We know about it now. So the effect of that on a family. So it's really about a family's journey before, during, and after the Second World War, as the children grew up, and how the grown-ups dealt with some anger, some addiction, and also how some secrets came out about how the women were living and being independent during the war. So this is a story set way back in before 1939, during and after, and it's set in England, in London, and in a small town called Painswick, and also in an industrial town called Birmingham. These are places I grew up, so the background to the story is very authentic. Some people might be interested in this because it is set in a different culture. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening are from America, and hopefully some people from England or other English-speaking countries will be curious about the standard of living in England at that time. So before the Second World War, in ordinary families, there were coal fires, and you had to shovel the coal into the fire, and it would be an open fire. And it's certainly not central heating. In North America now, everybody pretty much has central heating and don't even think about about having cold rooms. So in my family, when I was growing up, there was one coal fire that would be lit at the end of a day when people came back from work, and the coal fire would heat the house, or most of the house, but not all of it. The water would be, if you want to have a bath, or a bath, as you say, in North America. I still don't quite speak North American. So if you wanted a bath at that time, you probably just turn the heater on just before you have a bath, and it would probably be about once a week. And the rest of the time you would, stand up in front of the sink and wash. So those were the kind of the standard of living that was during that World War and post-war time. So everyday life in a family, those are quite vivid stories, I think, people that sets the scene. So now there was the women at that time were. I see Beth said, "I love your book, Jenny." Have you read it, Beth? Oh, thank you. The women at that time, when the men went to war, the women picked up a lot of jobs that weren't normally trained for. So a lot of the women city women went into the farms and were, mucking up pigs and milking cows and things like that, driving tractors, because the guys had gone to work, had gone to war. So they became, very strong and independent, and they kind of liked that freedom. And they also were sent into the munitions factories to, make all the wartime, guns and machines and tanks and things like that. So they became mechanics and worked machines. So middle-class women weren't used to all of that. In London, after the Blitz, a lot of women would go out and work with the ambulances and pick up dead bodies, and I can't imagine that. That's crazy. Beth says this could be a movie soon. Yeah, I would like that. It is quite dramatic at times. I think some of the scenes are quite good. Set in London, post-war, during the war, and then some peaceful scenes in the countryside. He said, so what also happened was before the Blitz happened, the Blitz, that was when the Germans were bringing their bombs and trying to destroy London and all the industrial centers. The children were evacuated. Mothers and children were evacuated and went to live in families in the countryside or in more peaceful areas that weren't going to be likely targets. So it also tells the story of one little girl who was evacuated, and also how she was adopted, because the theory was that her mother was killed in the Blitz because she didn't show up when the war was over. So this little girl was adopted, and there were a lot of secret adoptions at that time. Secret adoptions, or adoptions that were done without a whole lot of legal papers, and children were left homeless. So they were, new homes were found for them. Beth is asking, am I going to have a sequel? Yeah, I'm working on it. By the way, I've been a little distracted. I've been writing some children's stories in the past little while. This is a little change from doing this historical fiction book, because I had to get some of the dates right, because a lot of the stories that I'm telling in this book, the dates were before, and what was happening was before I was born. So I have to make sure that historical facts were correct. Like when was the beginning of the war, and when was the Blitz, and what Churchill was saying, all of those. I had to get those dates and some of those facts right. So there's a little bit of work involved. If you're doing a historical fiction novel, you have to get the history right. So yes, I think I am working on a sequel, but I don't know how long that will take. This took me quite a long time, by the way. let me go back to the theme in the story. So I've got the theme of post-traumatic stress with somebody coming home from war. I've got the theme of independent women and what that was like, and how they became very strong and resourceful, and also how they also had wartime romances because the men were gone for years, and so there's a little bit of romance in there. And then I've got the theme of adoption and a secret adoption, and how the child was adopted, didn't know she was adopted, which was probably a mistake by the person who adopted her, and how her mother, actually biological mother, did show up, and the trauma that caused within the family when some of the secrets were revealed. So some of it is, normal family life. Some of it is how everybody deals with addiction and recovery, PTSD, and how there is possibility for recovery, because I do have that in the book about how it is possible to recover and how families can recover from those traumas. And also about, the addictions and, the addictions, and also about the secrets about adoption and what that was like. Incidentally, I have my dogs in the background, I'm sorry. Incidentally, my husband read this book, and he knew of a friend of his who had a child that was taken away from her because she was, unmarried and, young. That's what they did back then. And he contacted her and said, have you ever thought of trying to find your child? After he read my book, and knowing that, it's possible to reconnect. And she said, well, I've been trying, but I haven't had any luck. So he did some research and managed to find some data on how she could actually request to connect to her long-lost child that was taken from her for adoption. So that's one of the positive side effects from this book, that somebody actually did manage to reconnect with their child. And that was a good connection. In my book, it wasn't such a good connection. And it takes a few years maybe for reconciliation to happen. And that's in the sequel. So I published this book by myself. Keep creating, says Angela. Yeah. It's a crazy thing, creating. It's crazy because you get into a different mind space when you're creating. I was even finding I was dreaming about my characters, because I have several kind of very independent, different characters. Maybe it's the British blood, I'm not sure. But they would show up to me in my dreams, and I would be wanting them to do certain things in my book. And, in a way, they would kind of argue with me and say, I'm not going to do that. So these characters that I made up almost became like real people. And maybe that's a good thing. If you read them, hopefully they'll feel real to you, because this is fiction after all. So, and by the way, when I first started writing, I was writing very much by myself, and I wasn't sure whether my writing was any good or not. But I live in the villages here in Florida, and there are a lot of writing groups, critique groups. I thought, well, maybe I'll join a critique group and see if anybody thinks my writing's any good. This was in the very beginning part. And there were a lot of people in that group, different stages of writing, some, experienced authors, some beginning ones. And at the beginning, it would be like, you hand in, a piece of your work, and it comes back with all these red marks on it. But then that's helpful. And gradually there were fewer red marks. And I think my writing definitely improved because of working with a critique group, people who have no agenda as to whether your book is good or not, or whether your writing is good enough, but they just give you good critiques. And that was fantastic. So if anybody wants to start writing, find a group of people who can read your work and critique you. I must say it's a little daunting at first, but We will recommend your book to our employees. Keep it going. Who are your employees, Letty B? Letty B? I want to recommend my book to their employees. Okay. Let's see, where was I? Talking about critique groups. Okay, yes. So then I finished my manuscript. My dog's going again. I finished my manuscript, and then I then found an editor who was absolutely fantastic, who helped me put it together and corrected some little things and said, well, I can. This particular paragraph needs to go out, and actually that whole chapter needs to go out. It's out of place. So it's a little daunting, but it helps to have an editor and to fine tune your book. So that was incredibly useful, and that's Marcia Butler. She was my editor. And then what was the next process? Editing is very, very important. There's different kinds of editing. There's line editing, which is just checking to see whether the spelling is right and proofreading it and all that. But then the content editing, that was what I found was the most valuable, to actually see whether it all held together and whether the characters were believable, and whether the story worked with an arc, a beginning, and whether the characters changed during the story. So, and certainly my characters did change during the story, and that's interesting, because the two primary ones at the beginning were young lovers just before the war, young RAF pilot and a woman, and they had a little romance, and then started to build a life together, got married just before the war, and of course he was gone for a long time, and then he came back. And so in this story you see how he changes from being very confident and loving and caring to being somewhat erratic and angry and with some PTSD, and being a little bit unpredictable and a little harder to be around. So he changed. He changed from really being more like a good guy to being a tormented guy, and then back to being almost back to the same thing, because he changed as a result of therapy, and how other people change and they grow and change throughout this. And just as in life, people grow and change. People are not the same. I'm not the same person I am now as I was when I was 21. Things happen. You grow, you become, bad things happen, good things happen, you become wise. Hey, yeah, hopefully at this point in life one is wise. And maybe some of that comes through in the book. That's what I hope. Wonder if anybody has any questions to ask. Anybody has any experience with living with somebody with PTSD? PTSD, if people don't know what that is post-traumatic stress disorder, which back then, in the Second World War and other previous wars, it wasn't known as that. It was known as battle fatigue, and it was thought that people were weak and they just couldn't handle. They weren't strong and brave. But really, anybody who goes to battle is going to have some form of stress. And now really it's accepted that people will have some kind of stress, some post-traumatic stress, and that there is some help. And for people to acknowledge it, it's not about weakness, but it's about, okay, I need some help and I can get it, and I don't have to live with this forever. And hopefully that comes through in the book. But also how it's hard for the caregivers or the partners or the children living with somebody like that. So this is about an everyday family. I'm not sure whether it really is an everyday family, but a family that is dealing with some of these issues. So, and some sort of ordinary little things like cups of tea. I'm British, so I like drinking tea. I live in America, and everybody seems to drink coffee or iced tea. I like hot tea with milk. And some of those little rituals are in the book, about sitting down to have a cup of tea, and talk. And that's very much a British tradition. And sometimes with some cakes and cookies and things like that, except they wouldn't be called cookies, they'd be called biscuits. So, and I have, for North Americans, I have a page in this book that talks about British slang. So, because the British slang is in there, and some people may not know what that is. Let me just see if I can find it in here. Okay. Oh, I can't find it right now. But the British slang is, it's kind of interesting for the North American people to see that and to get it translated so they understand what it is. Or for the British people to get British slang translated and know what the American version is. So, so hopefully there's a bit of humor in there as well. It's not all gloom and doom. It's about, a family growing. Little kid like Susie. Susie is you get to see Susie, who was the girl who was adopted, and how she had a lot of freedom when she was evacuated from London. And she grew up in this family in the countryside, and she was able to ride a bike and go fishing and playing with friends, and not having that freedom that I think a lot of kids these days don't have. So some of that is in the book too. Yeah, my dogs are out there. Anybody have any other questions? So if you self-publish, there are some ways of getting some attention, and apart from your local critique group. So I entered this book in a little competition with the Florida's Writers Association in Florida here. It's a convention that meets once a year, and they offer competitions, and it's called the Royal Palm Awards, where they give prizes for people and for different genres of books, from historical fiction books to romance to children's to mysteries to nonfiction. All different kinds of genres are in competition. So I entered my book because somebody said it was a good idea. I'll just go give it a try. Enter your book. You'll get some good critiques. And I think, okay, critiques are good. And that was the only reason, really, I entered it, because I thought I would get some people, again, who didn't know me, who would critique my book once it was finished. So anyway, I entered it. And, lo and behold, I got first place in my genre of women's fiction, historical fiction, literary fiction. So I got first place. So that's that little award just right there. It's the Royal Palm Literary Award Competition, first place. And then I also entered it into another one, Readers' Favorites, and I got a silver award for that one. And then they give you little stickers and a 5 stars. So somebody thought it was a good book, I guess. So I can put those little stickers on there. And it comes in a hardback, and it comes in softcover and ebook. Now, a lot of people like reading Kindles these days, so it comes in a Kindle, so you can read it wherever you are. And please, if any of you read my book, please give a review. Those are very, very valuable. So, any questions? Is anybody there? Here's my book. Ripple Effect because of the war, part 1, before the war, part 2, during the war, and part 3, after the war. So it's in 3 sections. Question. As a writer, what would you choose as your mascot, avatar, spirit animal? Me. Well, in this book, there is a rose. It's called a peace rose. It was bred just after the Second World War, and it was a hybrid tea rose, I believe. Anyway, it's a beautiful rose, and it's called a peace rose. So if there's any kind of mascot, I think I would be the peace rose. It's kind of golden, pink around the edges, and it's beautiful. And that kind of is the flavor, probably, of my book. It's all about peace and recovery and redemption. And because I'm a biologist, there are some botanical things in the book, and there is a peace rose which is quite significant in the book that is a memory of a wartime romance as well for the heroine in the book. Wish I had a picture of that rose. It's a beautiful rose. So I'm not sure who's listening to this, whether they are, what was your hardest scene to write? Probably the sex scene. It wasn't really a sex scene. It was more like a love scene. And it was pretty intimate, and it just felt a little personal somehow or other, writing that. But it was kind of fun. I think also there was another scene that was probably difficult between a mother and daughter, since I've had some issues between myself and my daughter that have been at times a little tense. Maybe there's a little flavor of that in the book as well, where the daughter who discovers she's been adopted is furious with her adopted mother for not telling her. And that's pretty painful and poignant scene, I think. Any other questions? Because I don't know how many people are watching. By the way, as a change from writing historical fiction, which was really, we're at 25 minutes. Okay, I need to wrap up in a minute. As a change from historical fiction, I started writing children's books because I thought that might be easier. Didn't have to do so much homework. It was fun, and those are in the book, in the work. It's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, but with a princess and dragons and bees and things like that. Anyway, that's in the works. It's called Princess Rose in the Wild Woods, and it's got a lot of magic in it. So working on that, I have an illustrator. So if anybody wants to find out about that or me, you could write to jennyfernswriter@gmail.com or my website, jennyfernswriter.com. So thank you very much for listening. Oh, I've got a question. Who is your favorite author? At the moment, I think it's Jodi Picoult. I think because I like how she bounces from one character to another and makes you pay attention to each character, and she develops those. But there are many other authors, but that's my most recent one that I've been reading. Well, thank you very much for listening. And if anybody wants to buy my book, please go to Amazon. Of course, you can just get it any way you like, ebook, hardback, softcover. And please give me a review. And tell me what if you write, and I will do the same for you.